And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Mark Beale, hypnotherapist specializing in past and between life regressions, as well as dark spirit and ET releasement. He's given over 5,000 regression sessions, and he's here today to share his stories with us. Mark, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thanks so much. Great to be here with you, Jeff.
Mark, how did you get interested in hypnotherapy in the first place?
Well, my interest began really when I was 25. So I wasn't inherently interested in it before that time. So I had a pretty conventional upbringing. I wasn't particularly interested in dark spirits or ETs. I was interested in exploring the world and traveling. So I did that. And in my travels, I came across meditation. And after a 10-day meditation retreat, I got hooked on it and went back to India, where I lived for a number of years. And that was when I was 25. So I've been on this path for a lot of years. I'm 52 now. I've been a full-time professional helping people with spiritual awakenings. But my own spiritual awakening really started when I had an experience about a year into meditating, and I had some Kundalini experiences arising. But one night I had an experience where, and I'd recall some past lives that related to my life and helped me on the healer's path. But then I had an overwhelming spiritual experience of a Kundalini arising, past life recall, but it wasn't just one past life. It was like 100 past lives, and not just the past lives, but the past deaths. I recalled being a person in Africa and being killed, but I also recalled being the killer. So, and I went through all of the history of human suffering, and I felt that at some point I began to not judge the killer and to not be afraid as the killed. There's a part where I felt like I went past a certain duality, that I had experienced a lot of the karma of the world, and I felt towards both of them equally a sense of compassion. And that compassion stopped the whole play. It had seemed like I'd been held down watching this whole horrific history of humankind through a lot of past lives, but it led me into a sense that all of it was bound by an underlying spiritual energy or beingness, just like molecules or atoms that make up that whole experience. And there's an emptiness and a peace to it that passes understanding. And so I woke up that morning, but it was more like a universal consciousness coming into my body. And as I walked around, I saw other people as beautiful. And I saw myself and felt myself as if I was complete and perfect as a state, so that I'd kind of resolved a lot of karmic issues in myself and come to a peace that passes understanding. But as I saw other people, I saw that they hadn't. And I had this, it wasn't a feeling, it was a state that lasted for 12 hours. But I saw that other people had an incompletion, an imperfection, and I saw a divinity within them, like an ultimate perfect divinity. But they weren't seeing that, and I hadn't been seeing it myself the day before. But I felt in that moment a peace, but I wasn't, and in that moment I felt a compassion for others. So I remember the experience that I had in my dream, but I felt that again for the people around me. And so I felt in that moment, looking back, I'd become a healer, but I wasn't sure how that healing was going to manifest itself. I didn't know where to take it, what modalities to do. I'd experienced some past lives, but I hadn't put that together. And so as I was meditating a couple of days later, trying to integrate it, I had that experience for 12 hours that day, but then the next day it was kind of gone. But I wasn't chasing it. I didn't feel sad that I felt so good, and now I felt normal again. I felt in that moment, I transcended, and now I know transcendence is possible. And now I'm not transcendent anymore, but I know what I need to do. And that's to help others. And how am I going to do that though? So I sat in meditation, and I heard a voice that felt so external that said, meditate, follow the spiritual path. And I turned around, I was like, who's saying that? Why? It was an empty meditation hall. Why is somebody saying this to me? And there was nobody there. It was the first time and one of the few times that I'd heard directly, very auditorily, a spirit guide or a disembodied spiritual wisdom telling me something, giving me this message, but I still didn't know exactly what to do with it. And that was something that I would then find out the next week when another incident happened, but how's that for an opening?
That's good. What type of meditation were you practicing in India?
I started off with Tibetan Buddhist meditation. I then did Vipassana meditation. So in that, Tibetan Buddhists, they will take you through some therapeutic techniques and discuss things. But when you're doing Vipassana meditation, they'll just leave you there 10 hours a day, only meditation, no discussion, not much additional support, which is very helpful to get into a deep state. But what can happen is unresolved issues can come up and people then can abreact, cry, have memories from the past come up. And the advice can be just be mindful, watch things arise and pass away. So it actually worked for me because I was able to get into some of these blissful states. But I did notice some people around me were struggling a little bit, and that became part of my path and why I didn't go down a meditative path. I really I considered becoming a monk or a yogi, but then I had these experiences that pushed me towards a path of helping people resolve some of these spiritual issues that can come up along the way.
How did you confirm that past lives are real for both yourself and the people that you regress? Like, how do you know it's not just imagination?
Yeah, great question. And that is a big question. I think everybody faces it, even if you're on a spiritual awakening experience. So I'd felt, I said it was a dream. And I'd had, I felt that I'd been 100 people and lived 100 times and died 100 times. But how do I know it's true? But so what happens is you can see something and doubt it. But when you feel something at an emotional or spiritual level, that becomes something that's convincing to a degree. And enough that it can move you forward. But then the other thing is if the proof is in the pudding, if it makes a change. And so I realized that moment that I talked about is something that did transform me at a certain level. But I still did, to your question, I doubted it. I wasn't sure if it was real. And I didn't really know what to make of it or what it meant. But then I had an experience a week later that brought that into focus. And so that's a story that I can tell, which made it be something that wasn't just my trip inside my head, because it started to involve another person.
Would you say that this story confirmed it for you that this is real?
Well, yes, it actually did raise more questions, but it did give quite a lot of answers in the way. And it's the foundation of me understanding that multidimensional beings can exist and can be part of a consensual reality, not just my own trip.
All right. Well, tell us the story.
Great. So on this retreat, where I literally, the time that I had that experience of feeling a universal consciousness and a transcendent beyond bliss into a completion and a perfection, I met on that retreat a woman who was very spiritually advanced. She had spent 5 years in India with Indian gurus studying Kundalini yoga and a lot of traditions and doing a lot of meditation. So I was 1 year in, she was 5 years in. So we traveled together to another place in Nepal, Pokhara, and we spent some nights together. But then one night, late at night, she was sitting up in meditation in half lotus. I was ready to go to bed. So I said to her, "Hey, you ready to sleep, or can I turn the light off?" And she said, "Maya's not here. I'm Maya's spirit guide. You can call me Celeste." So chills ran down my spine. The voice was completely different. There was no part of me really that thought it was some sort of prank. I felt that I was in another dimension. And so I said, "Maya, what are you talking about? Who's Celeste?" She said, "I'm a being from another dimension, a higher frequency." So, and I knew she was a yogi, but she was a yogi who's into meditation. She wasn't doing yoga asana. And I know, and we joked about how she can't sit in full lotus. What kind of yogi are you if you can't do this basic asana? And then she just looked at me, took her leg, put it in full lotus.
So basically she was channeling. Is that right?
Well, as it goes on, I still don't know. And it's a great question. And I had that question as well. So we'll get to the answer eventually. But if I can tell the story about, I just say, well, where is Maya? Like, I mean, like if she's not here, well, what is happening? And so she said, Maya isn't here. She's in the background and she can't hear us. So, I mean, it's getting creepy. It's feeling otherworldly. I feel I'm in another dimension. I don't know if the laws of physics apply anymore. And the funny thing was, it's not just that her tone was different. English wasn't her first language, it was French. But her accent was different. She was more succinct. I know exactly how she talks. And, we talked a lot about a lot of things, but she had a clarity and a wisdom that was not fitting for her. And so then she started just downloading information. And she says, we are helping raise her consciousness. We're working with you and her for your spiritual enlightenment. And she said, she has realizations, but she has doubts. She discounts the things that she gets, as do you. And so I'm thinking, and I hadn't really talked with her a lot about this stuff. And so I started getting curious. I recovered enough to say, what is going on here? And I started interviewing her in a way. And I'm like testing her, like, who are you channeling? Who are you? What's going on? And I'd say, and I'd ask them questions that I know. I talked about it with her before, and I'd know exactly the kind of things she'd say. And then they'd give a completely different and much better answer. And then after they answered that, then they'd say lovingly to me, Mark, we know you're testing us, but the real test is if you can follow the message that we gave you to meditate, follow the spiritual path. That was the message that I'd heard in the meditation hall out of nowhere. I'd not told Maya that. They didn't know that. And it's one thing to have a message in your own head and to think it's your own trip. But when your girlfriend goes into a spontaneous trance and another being says it to you, then that kind of hit me. And I thought, it didn't convince me that it was real. It convinced me that nothing was real,
So you must have been kind of freaking out at the time. What was the conversation like once she came back?
Yeah, well, great question. I mean, I was freaking out. And so the conversation, they just started giving messages like, you need to pass this message on to her. You've got to observe it for yourself. And they were telling us about our duty together. You had past karma. You and your between lives times agreed to come to this place. But we've been working hard to guide you, to get you here in this life. Then I said, I thought you said you were Celeste. And so I'm sort of catching them out or just thinking, what's really happening here? And just watching their language and interviewing them and like testing them, and they're pushing back. And so they say, we're a number of souls who've been incarnating with her and guiding her from a disembodied perspective. So for me, a lot of this is about beings don't have to have bodies. There are multidimensional beings that exist at another level beyond that. And they also said, what's with all these questions? Relax. You don't need to question so much. And we talked for an hour. It is, and we did in that time. It seemed timeless. I'm going to guess it's an hour, and I can't remember how that night ended, but I went to sleep somehow. But it did continue on for 10 days, and so I can tell you the next step. But just to wrap this part up, I was at that time. I woke up in the morning, and I said to Maya, "Hey, funny conversation last night. What was that?" She had no idea what I was talking about, which is, and I didn't know what was going on. This is 27 years ago, so I can't go onto YouTube. I just wandered out into the town. I opened the door thinking, I really hope the universe and the world still exists, because I might be in some sort of matrix of energy or whatever. But I opened the door and, the conventional world was still there. I was kind of relieved. There was a bookstore. I felt great. Maybe there's some information. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to get. I just picked up a book, and it was called Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. And I'd heard of past lives from Buddhists, but I never heard of past life regression. So it was that day that I got guided to that book where I realized, okay, you think you're a healer, this is your modality. And I picked up the book, and it was like, I couldn't believe it, as my client went into a trance and started telling me things she couldn't know from a higher dimension. I was like, well, thank God it's happened to somebody else. I'm not the only one.
Did you wonder if all that maybe this woman had multiple personalities?
Yeah, exactly. I did. And so I brought that up with her the next night. And so when I think back on it, I'm not sure that she was channeling something. I felt that she was kind of just absent, and a different being had taken its place, a multidimensional being that doesn't need a body, had just come in and spoke through. I don't know if that's channeling or not, but we certainly didn't sit down and think, I would like to connect to a channel. It was just completely spontaneous. 1 minute she's sitting there, the next minute she's in a trance state talking to me. I didn't ask for it. She didn't ask for it. It's a spontaneous occurrence that's giving us this powerful karmic message and education and download. And so, yeah. But then I can tell you what happened in some of the nights to go, because I, like you, I tried to talk rationally. So I thought psychologically, and I literally asked them, Celeste, could you just be a fragment of Maya's own personality? And I'd been thinking about this, thinking, oh, I'm quite clever. That's probably what it is. I was quite proud of myself that I thought of that. And I thought, if it comes up again tonight, I'm going to ask that. And then, I said that to her, but in her energy field, I didn't feel smart at all. I felt like a bit of an idiot for saying that. And she just looked at me and said, Mark, can't you see beyond the world of form to reality? And I felt like a schoolboy who doesn't know anything. And in that moment, she looked at me and she sort of seemed to flicker. There was an aura, a light energy that went around her. It just grew and flared. And she just became all light. Her body seemed to dissolve away into a total emptiness. For some seconds, she was invisible, just not there. Then she just flickered back in again.
Each subsequent night when this would happen, I'm assuming she would start meditating, and then at some point Celeste would show up?
At a certain point, she wouldn't even be meditating. Maya would switch off, Celeste would switch on. And,
wow.
At one point, it got to the point where after a number of times, I was curious, can I trigger this? So Maya was there, and I was like, Maya, can Celeste be there? And Celeste came in. Yep, what do you want?
So it sounds like to me that Celeste was always with her, even though she wasn't in a body. She was just maybe like a guide.
Yeah, the way that I'd understand it now is, we have a soul council that can help guide us towards certain things in our life. We have spirit guides that guide us to meet people, but normally they sit in the background and maybe they whisper to us. But for Maya to get completely out of the way and for them to come through and sort of inhabit and speak through it is very unusual and odd. So this is a really extreme version of what I do in hypnotherapy. I will, but we set an intention. Let's create a hypnotic state. It just doesn't happen out of nowhere. And let's invite spirit guides to be here, and let's ask them for things. And they tend to sit in the background, and they will give us kind of, similar information, but not just in this visceral way that was not asked for. And what I think it was is them just like giving me a kick in the ass, saying, this guy, his meditations are going great, but he doesn't know what to do. We have to point him towards this book and give him something that's going to move him off one path onto this other one. And so then she started getting into the discussion. So you're asking, what was she talking about? And it got into spirituality, ascension, kundalini activation, the role of universal love and romantic love. And so it was all like very light and beautiful, like really amazing. So that's why I'd ask, hey, is Celeste there? Because, honestly, talking to, it was more interesting talking to Celeste.
I was about to make a joke like that, like, let's come out and play.
Yeah. And part of the reason for that is because Maya had been sort of backing away. I think that's the reason Celeste could even come through. And so so this is where there's a bit of a turn in the story, because over these days, what she was speaking of became less infused with wisdom, and it became more like, she was trying to speak about general wisdom. So I'm thinking, that just sounds a bit more like some unresolved trauma for Maya as a kid. It doesn't quite sound as wise and perfect as it had before. And then it started getting a bit dualistic, like, the fight between ego and enlightenment. And not only that, during the day, she still didn't remember anything in the day, but then it did become a bit of a problem because it was starting to negatively affect her. And she went from, I can't remember it, but that's curious, cool, to started acting oddly during the day. And so that's when it turned. And so we've got, wise beings, a group of beings guiding us. But what I find, and I've continued to find this over the 20 years that I work with people spiritually, is that if you open the door and you open it too wide, there can be a bunch of other spirits there as well. So that's where you get some darker spirits. And often dark spirits will appear to be light spirits, but deceive. And so that started to be a bit what happened, to the point where I got so concerned enough to call her mother and fly her home for treatment. And ironically enough, her father is a psychiatrist. And so it ended difficultly.
Is it possible that Celeste herself could have been some kind of dark entity playing games with you guys?
A lot of things are possible. My feeling is that Celeste was an authentic, but that Celeste was then moved to the back, and that some darker residues came up. And what ideally could have happened was that we could have had more agency of it and more choice. But I think what it ended up becoming was a spiritual emergency, which is a technical term, which is like a spiritual awakening, but it's where there's a sudden collapse of somebody's ego and sense of reality. And so that's not, and so that is something that they recover from. And so I think that she went into that, and that Celeste, and so what I think the lesson from it is that there are a lot of energies that can get involved, and that even a wise spirit guide can't necessarily protect you from that, and that may, and so therefore there was a bad outcome in a way, that it was a rough ending and she had to go back and do some healing. But is it ultimately bad in the end? Because she did recover from that. We both learned from it. And what the takeaway for me was that, it's great to have spiritual awakenings and try and push forward and have a kundalini and be enlightened, etc. But you have to really clean house first. You have to really look after your whatever karmic residues you've got from old wounds. If there are dark entities around, you can't just try and race head first to the light. You do have to deal with some of the dark on the way. And so that was kind of a rude awakening for both of us. And the fact that I couldn't quite help her at that time was part of what gave me the fire to want to learn how to help people with difficult spiritual awakenings in future. And also that just to be able to help and work with people in trance when they're not having these crazy, really extreme versions that I was initiated in. But I say this because I think a lot of people listening will have some sort of crazy spiritual awakening story like this to some degree or another. And, they feel like me, as we walk out, will anyone understand this? What does this mean? And if I've been through that fire myself and I've now seen it in, hundreds of other people in cases like this, then they can feel I'm not alone. I can pick up a book and that can reassure me. Or if you're in the middle of it, like if we had someone in the middle of it, they could have helped Maya and it wouldn't have got to that ending. And so, but because I know what I know now, I would like to be able to go back and help her, but I can't. But I can now work and help hundreds of other or thousands of other people because of that experience. So I don't look upon it as a bad thing, but as, kind of a really going through the fire and coming out the other end. Just like I had that dream, I ended up in a kind of a heaven realm, but it wasn't rainbows and butterflies along the way. It was by facing up to some of the darkness of being a killer and being killed that I was able to go beyond that, not be afraid of it, not back away from it, not deny it, not try and not see it, not get hung up on it, not stop, but just keep going to it and learn from it, and make that a positive, or be going beyond positives and negatives. But it's just something that needed to happen. So I think they brought us together to have those beautiful messages at the beginning, but I think they knew that was going to break down as well. But that was therefore actually a breakthrough.
Is there a danger to hours and hours of meditation or spiritual awakenings that make you susceptible to being attacked by dark entities? And maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
Well, I think I don't know if I'd call it a danger, but there's certainly a possibility. And so, for example, there's a danger in driving a car, and people get hurt. But should we not be doing it? And there's a danger in traveling, but we take a big risk and we may learn a lot. Some people will have problems with that. And so I think the danger can be to the physical body, But if we wrap ourselves in cotton wool and never take any risks, I think that's quite dangerous. But then people go the other way. And so you absolutely see this in spiritual communities. People push too hard. They try to have a massive Kundalini awakening when they haven't done the yama niyamas, which is the basic sweep the temple door first before you try and go for the big thing. And so that danger is then something that is really just a message that points you to the fact that, oh, here's some dark shadow stuff you need to work through. And when you do that, you end up better for it.
Can you give us some spiritual tips to clean house before we dive deeper in our own spiritual journey?
Yeah, so having good guidance is important. And so following a teacher and listening to your inner voice as well, and not giving away your power. So I think part of what Maya did was that she had a number of things cumulative. So it can be, have a patience and a persistence. This path is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think some people are a bit impatient to get to an end point. But I think just, and can be judgmental about things. And so they may then judge something that we may appear at a surface level as being bad, but look for the message in it and the learning, and so that it can become something that's helpful. And so that's actually what happened to her. In the end, she was able to go back, get healed. Did take a little while, but then she was able to come back and guide people through India on spiritual tours of the spiritual sites. And now she's a spiritual coach working and helping a lot of people. And so, is it dangerous? It's certainly, it was a bumpy road, but I think it ended in a good place overall and was worth the difficult thing. So that's another thing I'd say. If people are really going through difficult times, it can look dangerous or troublesome, or that something's really gone wrong. But a lot of times it is something that it's nice to have the flowers and all the good feelings, but sometimes a lot of that is actually something that's empowering us. And so we can take it as such.
All right. So you got this book by Dr. Brian Weiss, and at some point you became a hypnotherapist.
Yeah.
What kind of conclusions have you made due to your work? Like, for example, what happens to us immediately after we die?
Yeah, immediately. I actually replay, so we call it past lives, but I love the way you're cutting to the chase, which is great, because we say past lives, so it's really, a lot of it is past deaths. And so I had that dream where I'm living, but I'm a killer, I'm being killed, and I'm dying. And every time I take someone to a past life, pretty much almost every time I'll take them to a past death, because they're able to see themselves leave the body, feel a relief and release, have a higher perspective, and look down and come to peace with the way that they'd passed. They're often able to view the life that they left for a couple of weeks afterwards, attend their funeral, appear to people as dreams and say goodbye. And then it's like they're looking down. And then you can say to them, and they'll often do it on their own, or you can ask, what happens if you were to turn and look up? And then they're able to find their way to the light. They often meet their spirit guide, just like this guide who's come through Maya, that may be there in the light waiting for them as well. And so the unusual thing is that you see them when normally you'd see them when you're dying. And so to see them in life is odd, but to see them when you're dying is I do it every day in past life regression. And then you take them into a between lives. You can meet the soul council, and they'll say, we set you up with that big awakening experience where you had to have that weird thing about, is there some sort of issue, and how did you overcome that? And that was scary, wasn't it? But you weren't too scared, and you kept going, and you got the message. So well done. That was the challenge, and you passed the test. And so that's part of it. But then part of what can happen is if people leave the body and for whatever reason, and often it's things like guilt or confusion or vengeance or anger that they don't then pass on. So then they become an earthbound spirit. And so that's then something that's when the spirit release comes in. So yeah, so that's sort of a next phase. And you know what, Brian Weiss's one book that was there in particular, but that got me into, but the next phase as we're talking more about spirit release, dark forces, ETs, there's another book by Dr. William J. Baldwin called Spirit Releasement, a Technique Manual, which is an incredible book. And that's kind of a bit more relevant even to the conversation that we've got now. And so that's where he goes on. He identifies earthbounds, which, but then also dark force spirits, which we can talk about. And then this is where the ETs come in. So that's where you open up the world to the world of spirit to the positive, but then you get all these other spirit entities that can be there. And Baldwin really did a great job in going into that.
So when somebody is an earthbound spirit, they can't reincarnate. They're just stuck.
They have paused their reincarnation. They can reincarnate at any time that they decide to, but often they don't want to because they're sort of angry or they are confused or lost. And a lot of times it can be a simple matter of redirecting them to the light. But this is where the dark spirits come in, because if they see an earthbound spirit floating around without a body, not knowing what to do, not having someone like me even to guide them and say, turn around and look to the light, go towards it. And they might even think, but I can't because I caused my own death and I actually caused the death of my brother as well. I feel so guilty. I don't deserve to go into the light. The light is loving. Or that person killed me. I hate them. I feel this energy of hate. I don't want to go to light. I resonate with hate. And therefore I want to connect and attach to someone else's hate that's hateful and not move into the light. And so then we have to do some healing to get them out of that emotion, to forgive themselves, or to just get over that, because they can be there for 50 years feeling hateful. I'm like, well, you know how long it's been? How long are you going to stay in this state? And eventually they just sort of get bored of it. And there are various ways you can sort of convince them to move into the light. But so that can be something that's their own emotions or their own self holding themselves back. But then dark spirits can come in and kind of recruit them to do some of their work. Talk to them, whisper to them, lie to them, deceive them, and say, you know what, that anger and guilt that you have, you are a bad guy. You don't deserve it. In fact, in order to get that guy has hurt you, here's how you can do something. You can hurt other people in the way that you've been hurt. And that way that'll set, and then people are then vulnerable in those extreme states and then get in service of a dark one. So a lot of times releasing an earthbound spirit's pretty simple. They're just a bit lost and confused. You say, go to the light. But if they get connected to a dark spirit, then you have to then talk to that other entity as well. So now you've got two entities, one sort of manipulating the other one. So you have to deal with both of them.
Is a dark spirit basically us that has been there for so long, it's turned almost completely evil? Or is it a completely different type of being from us?
Completely different type of being. So that's actually one of the key distinguishing factors. So an earthbound spirit, by definition for me, is a being that used to be a human, and a dark force entity is a being that has never had a human body. But they could have existed for thousands of years, and often, so then you can regress them to their existence. So they didn't have a human body. It's an interesting question whether they've had any kind of body. Some may have, some may not have, but they're kind of living this odd, disembodied, higher dimensional, energetic kind of a life. But the key to them is that they feel that they're under the service of a dark master. And so, yeah, but it's something that, again, this is something that I know by going through a list of questions that Dr. Baldwin gives and just getting consistent answers again and again. It's like, how do I know it's real? And I didn't know as well when I first started my practice. And in the book, it says, if you ask them, have you had a human body or not? And they go, yes, I have. And then you go, well, what were you? Then it's an earthbound spirit. And if you say, have you had a human body or not? And they go, oh, that's disgusting, gross. And then it's like, well, it's probably a dark spirit. And they say, or they might even say, no, I haven't. And if you for asking, and they'll sort of just be really rude in a way and it's just a totally different energy to an earthbound spirit. So it's really quite easy to tell the difference. And it is, and so it doesn't have a human history, is my experience, but it can attach to humans and influence them to a degree.
Well, what are the dark spirits doing here? Feeding off our energy or just causing trouble?
All of the above. Yep, they absolutely feed off your energy. And so that's one way that we can, you asked about, what can you do to heal yourself or to avoid attachments? One of those ways is to raise your vibration, raise your energy, to choose forgiveness, to choose not to hate or to not be guilty, because they will So a lot of times they will feed off that energy, connect to it, and exacerbate it. So we have to take some personal responsibility, which is it's not just, I'm fine, but this dark force entity is making me do it. That's how it's doing that because it can latch on to a little bit of part of you. So it's not just get this entity off me. It's we have to be in a partnership where we have to get whatever it is that they're latching onto. So that's why when I do this kind of releasement work, I have to do hypnotherapy to help them. And then the dark spirit has got less to feed on and it's less attractive to be around. And then it gets weakened. And so then when we get to a next phase of helping the dark force move on, it's easier to do. But you don't want to, fight something you don't want to work with something once it's weakened, and you weaken it by strengthening your client.
Would you call these dark spirits archons?
That's not a terminology that I'd use. What is that? What's that connected to, archons?
I'm not an expert on the subject, but
okay.
I think if you look back at the Gnostic texts and stuff, that they talk about that there's been these dark entities feeding off our energy for a long time.
Right. Well, I think there are probably 1,000 names for them, but which is interesting because then they're kind of cross-cultural. A lot of cultures will speak about it, and so it is kind of a universal thing. And then the key thing comes back as well, to what is it that drives them? Where do they get the energy for? What is their impulse for acting? And this is where you get into the dark one, which has a number of names as well. And so the funny thing is they tend to be driven by this need that they have some sort of contract, that they've made some sort of vow, that they are afraid of a master who's given them a task, like attaching to a person and trying to disturb their life. So the reason that I'm speaking about this is because past lives are fantastic, but that's something that in the last few years, as this awakening is happening and the light is getting brighter, so too can the shadow. And it's something that comes up more for helpers these days. And it's important not to be afraid of it, not to think, that's too rough and too difficult a road. There is a way out of it. And it does end up at your highest purpose, even though it doesn't feel like it somewhere along the way. And in the end, it's actually something that's quite interesting because people tend to, particularly when you have this mythology, so like these names that, I don't know that name, therefore I'm disempowered because I don't know what that name is. And now you've got some authority because you know a special name that I don't. And entities will do exactly this kind of thing to make you feel like you don't know what you're talking about and that they have some sort of special knowledge and therefore something like that. And they'll start to deceive, to belittle, but if we go to the core, we can switch tables on them a little bit because they're attempting to deceive us, but they themselves have been deceived. And so that's something that we can get to as we switch the tables. But to do that, we have to be pretty solid in ourselves. So that's part of by going through that fire. There's not a lot that I haven't seen. And so when they start coming in with some tricks, you're able to sort of see through their tricks and then play those tricks back on them.
You've been encountering earthbound spirits and dark entities. What about ETs? How do they play into this?
Yeah. ETs come up in a number of ways initially. So when I do past life regression, I'll see people have past lives as ETs. And a lot of ETs are positive in a way. And so a lot of my clients will talk about, Arcturians and reptilians. But for me, as a helper, my concern is, are they helpful? Are they positive, neutral, or negative in their impact? And so what I'm talking about is times where they have a negative impact. And that impact is particularly where they have device implants. So that's sort of one of the main areas that I see in terms of helping people and that's because they have significant issues in their life. So they may be having nightmares or mainly a sense of some sort of dread, like spiritually uneasy, like I'm being watched, like something's wrong and shouldn't be like this. And I don't know what it is, but they sense that it's ET or spirit related. And so they literally approached me with that as a presenting issue. And just one thing as well, as I was talking to a bigger audience, it's very easy to hear these kind of things and sort of self-assess. But the kind of cases I'm talking about are a bit unusual, and the people that come to me are not wondering if they have an issue. They're very sure, and it's had very significant impact in their life to the point where they really need to do something about it to get help. Whereas a lot of people can have a curiosity about it. It's not negatively or significantly affecting them. So I don't want people to overly identify with some cases that can be, quite specific and, take it out of context.
Do some of your clients have zero interest in aliens and sci-fi? And if so, are they completely blown away when they start learning about the ET involvement?
Yep, absolutely. Most of them have no interest. I mean, it's sort of funny. I don't really have too much interest myself. So I'm not on ET forums. I don't read books about it. I'm just interested when it comes up in a client. So I've got an example. I had a client called Alvaro, and he was not interested even in spirituality whatsoever until 2 years before he met me for some spiritual sessions. And he felt that humans didn't really have souls, we're all just animals. But then he had a vivid dream in which he felt he was abducted by aliens. And he thought, well, that's some bullshit. And he told his girlfriend, hey, I've had some ridiculous dream. And she said, oh, really? And what happened then? And what happened then? She goes, yeah, that's exactly the dream that I had last night as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so it's the same thing where I had an amazing spiritual experience and aren't I special? And some spirit told me, meditate, be on the spiritual path. But then when my girlfriend voices it, I'm like, what? Then it suddenly feels it's that other level of some sort of evidence. And so for him, it was, the same thing. So that got him interested in those lines, but he's still a very conventional guy. So in his case, he was an online poker player. He lived in a beautiful tropical place, but he had a fear of bees. And one time a bee came in when he was trying to play poker, and he sort of freaked out and jumped away from his laptop, and it disturbed his game. So he was like, this is costing me money. I have to spend money to get help for my bee phobia. Then he said, by the way, I would have never approached you because I don't care about all this spiritual whatever, all this subconscious. But I had this dream about these ETs. Maybe we can look at that. And then he did say as well, after that, I've just got this weird sense that I'm some sort of prey and that some ETs are stalking or watching me. And so that's that was the setup that we had. And we went and did some other stuff about he'd been bullied in the past, etc. And so that was kind of actually triggering. So he sort of felt this ET thing is kind of bullying me, which reminds me of the unresolved residues of being bullied when I was a kid. And so we ended up helping the residues he had as a kid that made him stronger so that when we got to the ETs, he was able to process it. But there's a funny thing that happened as we went into that session that we decided, okay, past lives are over, let's focus on ETs. And so we had the pre-talk, we're going to talk about ETs today, we're going to review that dream, we're going to find out about this thing about you being prey. And just as I started and that was all in our pre-discussion, just as I started the hypnosis, the lights in his room went out. That's weird. And then his whole system just went down. And that kind of happens. Sometimes Zoom, can overheat or there can be a power cut for a couple of minutes. But I'm sitting there, 10 minutes later, nothing. An hour later, I get an email. Really sorry, this has never happened before. There's no logical explanation, but the electric went out. It's just come back on. What do we do? So I was like, well, let's just do it again tomorrow. But this is the kind of thing where, and I don't know how this works. It seems funny to me. It doesn't make sense, but I can just say anecdotally, they seem to be able to get involved in electrical issues and shut things down. So it's an incredible coincidence. I can't say that's a fact or how it happens, but I can report anecdotally this kind of thing does happen. And it came up again when we did finally get to do the hypnosis. I went and asked for a spirit. We got it. It wasn't shut down. And so I'll often take people, go to a place in nature, a safe place, bring your spirit guide. And he said, my place in nature is in a forest, but it's got a hut. And outside of the hut is my spirit guide. And he says, my name is the stopper. I'm here to stop entities disturbing you. And I'm going to keep this connection open.
Would you say that most ET involvement with the people is a negative thing or a positive thing?
For a lot of people, it's really positive and helpful. And so that I'm glad you asked, because please don't take what I'm saying as being some sort of thing like, it's dangerous to do this or that, or there can be negative things. All I'm saying is, if for people that are having that experience where they feel uneasy, that there is a way to work through that uneasiness. And for a lot of other people, when I do past life work, they will have wonderful times as being an ET in the past, living on other planets, living in other dimensions. They'll remember that between lives, a decision that they made to reincarnate as a human, but to bring in some of their wisdom. So a lot of it is positive. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is because, when I'm helping people, and so all that positive, it's like good news is, less news in a way, but it's sort of the bad news is we're attracted to it because we can learn from it and protect ourselves and know that there's something we can do about it. And so if it's all sort of good news and people think, well, there's something going wrong with me, and why aren't people speaking about this? And if it's supposed to be rainbows and light and it isn't sometimes, then what do I do? And so part of this message is that a lot of that there can be, it's positive, neutral, and negative. And if it's negative, then I'm a helper, so I help people with that. So I'm just so biased. Like if they don't need my help, I don't see them, or I'll see them incidentally. But if they come and say, I'm feeling that I'm being preyed upon, then that's where this kind of energy comes up, because I can help them with it.
Have you seen any patterns with the ETs? Like, have you discovered what they're doing here around the planet and what they're up to?
Yeah, great question. Everyone's experience is subjective, and my specialty, if anything, is really seeing that, and I do find a commonality. And so pretty much any time ETs comes up for me, it's related to devices, which is that they're putting in devices to people, and they can be doing a couple of things. They could be monitoring them, gathering data, or they can be conducting experiments. They're the main two, actually. And so the common thing that I find is that they have a device. And so we talked about a spirit can attach to a person, but ETs don't really attach to people in my experience. They just put on a device, and that device will be gathering data or maybe part of some experiment. And then, so what I do is we connect to the device and then use that as a method to go back and say, contact the one that planted that device and then discuss with them. And so, for example, with this guy that I'm talking about, his blocker was there. We were able to continue the conversation, and he found within him a device that he thought was like something from Lord of the Rings, like just some all-seeing eye or something that was in there, but in an energetic way, and it was observing him, and he felt uncomfortable with it. And so we were able to say to that device, and I asked them, can we go back to the entities that planted this device and ask them what it's doing there? And so then it became like a telephone, and the entities on the other end of it said, oh, yes, we implanted it. Why you ask? What do you want? And so now we're in a conversation with the ETs. So I'm not actually, a lot of the times it seems like they're sitting in a ship physically. Although it's what I sense as well is a lot of times they can be in bodies, but they don't have to be. And so that was something where we said, what's this device doing? It's looking at him. And so at that point, I said to him, and I helped guide, and we're like, well, what do we do now? It's there, it's monitoring us, it's making him uneasy. And so I said, well, look, there's a law of sovereignty. He hasn't given permission. We've found this. It's making him uncomfortable. We'd like you to release it. And we assert a law of sovereignty. We ask for it to be released. And then they'll say things like, they might agree. So in fact, you get a range of responses. Some will agree quite quickly and apologize. Some will just kind of try and ignore you. And then you have to persist. And some you have to sort of persuade them to take it back. So in this case, we're able to, in fact, so this was one where they didn't really want to take it back. And they were and it was actually like, so he was being stalked, but then so once you're being stalked, if you imagine a leopard stalking a gazelle, and then the minute that the gazelle sees the leopard, the chase is off. So what does the leopard do now? Is it going to be stalking it? It's just going to walk off. And we're saying to the leopard, hey, buddy, we got you. And it's like, whatever, I don't care anymore. It's over. And so like, well, what about us? What about this device? It's like, just ignored us. It was like, we don't care. Like the stalk's over. You do what you want to do. I'm just going to go and stalk somebody else. And so at that point, actually, he had his guarding spirit, but then he felt there's another being in here. And it felt like a universal police. And we said, well, what this device is here, what are we going to do with it? And he said, this universal police is saying he's helping enforce the fact that this leopard can no longer stalk you. And so that got the leopard to go away. But then he was like, well, what do I do with this device that's in there? And he said, that's not something that I can do for you, but you have the power to do it yourself. So he taught him like a little technique where he could bring in like a heat, but it was actually sort of like an intense cold. But if you'd imagine like a cold explosion. And so he psychically, through some help with this extra wise being that was coming in to help, was able to sort of dissolve and explode this device and release it in that way. But all of this is just through spontaneously in the moment figuring out, like, what are we going to do about this? What's happening? And getting some help and getting some intuition on how to resolve it.
Have you had many conversations with ETs?
A number, but particularly around these devices. And so these monitoring ones are there, but then I had others where they'll do experiments, as I mentioned. And so I had some with they created like an egg. My client described it as being egg-like and being reptilian-like. And so she described it as a spiky ball, which was it's an egg, but it's got spikes, which it's trying to protect itself from being found. And we actually had to remove a layer of a dark spirit before we got to that. So that's actually one reason why I bring up the dark spirits in the first place, because if you've got a lot of unresolved trauma in this life, well, then that's going to get in the way. Once you help that, then dark spirits are going to be harder to affect you. But once you but then a dark spirit will just take all of the attention. But once you peel that layer away, then you can find the ET device. So I find they're kind of the last in the line. And so in that case, the conversation I had with the ETs was along the lines of, again, same thing. I said, we'd like to contact the beings that have put this egg in here and ask them about it. And so then we had a conversation. So we're trying to decide, like, is this good or is this bad? So I'm not saying I'm here to release everything and it's got to go and it's bad and I'm judging it. I'm like, well, maybe it has some negative side effects on my client, which it was. She was really having some significant problems. But I mean, maybe there's a long game here. I don't know. So I asked them, I was like, it seems, what's happening here? And they said, we're running an experiment. I said, well, what for? It's like, we're trying to do a hybrid upgrade where we give her some kind of superpowers or extra human abilities. So I said to my client, how does that sound to you? Does that resonate? Does that sound right? Is that something you want? She goes, actually, it does sound kind of cool. And I was like, well, but what's the consequence of it? And so I said to them, this experiment that you're running, how long have you been running it? And then they said, when did the device get put in? And they said, it got put in when she was like 3 years old. So now I'm thinking, hang on, you put an egg in there for she was 35. You put an egg in there for 32 years. Eggs are supposed to hatch. The result, guys, it seems like the results of the experiment are in. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like the experiment, the answer is the egg, it's not creating superhuman powers. It's creating problems. Therefore, we can just call it a day, call the experiment over and take the egg back. Do you agree to that? And they were like, and it is kind of like, and isn't it a bit weird that you haven't noticed this already? And my client felt that. You often do get this sense that you're sort of dealing with lower level technicians. And when you point out some of these things by digging into it, they go, oh, okay, I suppose you've got a point. And so eventually they were able to agree. But then we got into this debate about, well, what are we going to do with the egg? And she was saying they're willing to release the egg, but they're concerned that they're going to get in trouble with their superiors and that they've invested a lot of time into it. So I said, well, can't you just take the egg back and like recycle it or use it in some other way? we don't have to destroy it in a bomb or, say it's bad or anything like that. And they seem to be happy with that. So they said, okay, that's great. And so we're getting there a resolution. And just as we got to conclusion, I thought, hang on, guys, how many other experiments are you running with this egg thing with other people around the world? And they said, a couple of hundred. So I said, well, how's that going with everybody else? And there's a little bit of a pause. They go, yeah, it's kind of the same as this one. So I said, well, you can tell your superiors that you've done a great job on your experiment. You've got a lot of important data. You've gone to a good conclusion, and now you can end it. And you can take all of these devices back and repurpose them or whatever you do with them. Do you agree with that? And they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds reasonable. So we sort of talk them into it like that.
Have you ever discovered through any of these conversations that ETs are here on the planet or in our orbit on a craft?
Yeah. What I find is everything that I come across is just really non-physical. So it's and that actually one of the clients who said, no, it's weird. They're not in the way that we understand them. They don't need a physical body, is how he described it. So I don't know the answer, and it could well be that I'm just not being exposed to any of that. But then the exposure that I do have is as if that was kind of my initiation, like a non-physical being speaks through a physical body. But they're in a dimension that doesn't require a physical thing. So my sense is that there certainly are ones that have ships and physical bodies, but I got a feeling that there is a layer of beings that don't need bodies, and yeah. So, but in terms of are they walking around amongst us? It's possible, but that's not something that I see in my practice.
After years of talking to ETs, dark entities, earthbound spirits, how has this changed you?
I've got some spiritual laws, and I've written a book about this where I go into details about some of these case studies. And so the first three really help us assess what's happening. So why am I here? Why is this happening to me? Why did I have these experiences? For me, the answer is karma. You've got a karmic connection to these things. So why is it that some people see physical reptilians and go into physical ships, and some people deal with them on an energetic level? Someone's got a karmic connection for this, someone's got a karmic connection for that. So it's sort of the law of cause and effect, and just the connection that you have. But then the question is, well, is that a good or bad thing? And so if we're really dualistic, we can take the spiritual awakening experience that I had and the spiritual emergency that my girlfriend had. You could take that as just dualistically good or bad, decide it's bad, and then that's the end of your spiritual growth. But the third law for me is the finite, which is however bad it was impermanent. It was something we went to it, we went deeply through it, and we got beyond it. And so that for me is where the next set of three laws comes. So that's sort of like the problem. And then the solution is if we can transcend duality and go into an infinite type spaciousness, it doesn't have to be, I'm just a finite physical body. If you can recognize there's a karmic body that reincarnates and can go out of the body and go into a between lives area, and then it can access an infinite transcendence with a peace that passes understanding and a deep love and compassion, so that we can transcend self and other. And so with that enables us to accept some of the challenges that we're in with the patience and persistence, and then take grounded action. So karma is also action. But if we act at the beginning, sort of out of fear and not wanting to face up to darkness, then we can kind of get stuck in it. But if we're able to look into the darkness so much that we can see the truth is there's light at the core of it, then we can take grounded action going forward that helps resolve karma, that helps increase lightness and doesn't get us stuck in this karmic wheel of some of the dualistic emotions. And so that all may sound a bit technical, but what it comes down to is in all of this, claim the power that you have. Don't give up your sovereignty. Claim your body. Find the abilities that you have. So for me, I think people overestimate the power that other things have, the external, and they underestimate the inner power. So use your power, develop it with your actions, get educated, get help, and have real felt experiences. And while we're in this dualistic world, we can be in it, and there can be a temptation with some of this to want to be in a better world. But we're here to learn. And the more that we learn, the quicker we get to that world. And so face up to some of the challenges and take this precious opportunity.
Mark, after watching this podcast, people may want to find out more about you and communicate with you and see what you're up to. What's the best way to do that?
Best way is probably my website, the Past Life Awakening Institute website. And I've got a YouTube channel, Past Life Awakening, Instagram, Past Life Awakening.
And you also have a book called Past Life Awakening. If people want to learn more about that, should they go to your website?
Yep, they can go to my website. So it's available in paperback from retailers around the world. So there's a page on that on my website, and it's also on Amazon. Yeah, and wherever good books are sold.
Well, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
This world, this dualistic world, is a school, but it's not necessarily our home. So take the opportunity in this finite dualistic school to learn as much as you can. It's not really an illusion, but it's not an ultimate reality. It's impermanent. And so when we're a kid, we can be really ready and wanting to get out of school or thinking it's never going to end. But once we graduate, we will graduate. And so have a patience and persistence. And what I find is when people are able to access their higher transcendent dimensions in hypnosis, they're able to access a high dimensional energy in this life, and that is preparing us for the high dimensional existence that we came from and will return to.
Mark, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.